Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Stories like this one, stories buried for decades, deserve to be heard. The autumn fog in the mountains of southern West Virginia has a way of swallowing sound. It softens voices, dampens footsteps, and turns every winding back road into a ribbon of mystery cutting through the Appalachian hills. On most mornings, it brings stillness, peace, a kind of quiet only people born here ever truly understand. But on the morning of October 14th, 1989, the fog carried something else, something heavier, something that settled over the cold town of Maple Hollow like a warning. Nestled deep between ridges, Maple Hollow was a kind of town where nearly everyone had an uncle in mining, a cousin in forestry, or a neighbor who'd lived in the same house for 3 generations. Yards had porches with rocking chairs that creaked when the wind pushed them. Kids rode their bikes in the middle of the street. The church bell still rang every Sunday. And people talked. They talked in the grocery store aisles, at football games, at the gas pump. They talked most of all at the one diner in town, Dottie's, where secrets travel faster than the coffee refills. Back in 1989, the town was smaller, rougher around the edges, and held together mostly by tradition and familiarity. If someone's dog barked too long, someone else knew. If someone's lights weren't on by dusk, the neighbors noticed. People cared, but they also watched, which is why when 20-year-old Lacey Whitlow didn't show up to her Saturday morning shift at the Maple Hollow Public Library, alarm bells rang almost immediately. Lacey was one of those people in town who didn't quite blend in, but didn't stand out either. She had a quiet sort of beauty. Long chestnut hair she almost always braided, soft almond-shaped eyes, and a smile that appeared slowly, like she was letting you earn it. She walked everywhere because her beat-up Chevy wouldn't always start, and she liked the smell of rain hitting pavement. She wore layered sweaters, hand-me-down denim, and the same pair of leather boots she'd had since high school. But what everyone remembered most was her kindness. Lacey checked on elderly neighbors, helped tutor struggling kids, and spent her weekends volunteering at the church pantry without ever calling attention to herself. She had dreams, big ones, that stretched far beyond Maple Hollow. She wanted to study archival history, to preserve stories and artifacts before they were lost forever. Places like this matter, she told her mother once. People forget that history starts small. But Lacey didn't get the chance to leave, because on that fog-soaked morning in 1989, history swallowed her instead. The last confirmed sighting of her was at around 6:45 a.m. She was seen walking down Ridgeway Road, the narrow lane that cut from her mother's house to the main street. She carried her canvas satchel, the one with the stitched bluebird on the front. She always carried it. Inside were things she never left home without: her journal, a book of Appalachian folktales, and a small cassette recorder she used like a diary. But what happened after she rounded the bend past the old sawmill, no one saw. Some said they heard a car engine rev. Others claimed they heard a woman shout, though the fog has a way of playing tricks on the ears. Some neighbors reported hearing nothing at all. What people did remember was this. Around 7:05 a.m., Mrs. Eudora Hensley, Maple Hollow's most prolific porch watcher, saw something odd. From her window, she spotted a dark pickup truck idling near the sawmill's entrance. Its lights were off, and the driver remained inside. She couldn't make out the face, but she remembered the shape of the truck. An old Ford. Boxy. Two-tone paint. The kind that rattled when the exhaust kicked up. But no one connected that sighting to Lacey until it was too late. By 8:15 a.m., the library's assistant manager, a stern woman named Judith Rayburn, was calling the Whitlow home asking if everything was okay. By 8:40 a.m., Lacey's mother, Ruth, was knocking on neighbors' doors asking if anyone had seen her daughter walking through the fog. By 9 a.m., her older brother, Chase, was driving every street within a 2-mile radius, honking the horn, hoping Lacey might appear. By noon, panic had replaced fog as the dominant air over Maple Hollow. It wasn't like Lacey to disappear. It wasn't like her to go anywhere without telling someone. It wasn't like her to leave behind the people who loved her. As word spread, Dottie's diner fell silent, a rare occurrence. The miners on night shift walked in still coated in coal dust, asking if the rumors were true. The church opened its doors early, and by late afternoon, everyone in Maple Hollow was talking about the same single, chilling possibility. Something bad had happened. Something that didn't feel random. Something that didn't fit the quiet rhythm of their small Appalachian town. People began replaying the morning in their minds. The fog, the emptiness of the streets, the sound or absence of noises that normally mark the start of a Saturday. Some neighbors recalled hearing the distant hum of tires on gravel. Others remembered seeing a shadow move between trees. But no one could say, with certainty, what happened to Lacey Whitlow. As sunset settled over Maple Hollow and the streetlights flickered on, families kept their kids inside. Porch lights glowed like tiny beacons in the dark. Fear crept into conversations like an unwelcome guest. And still, there was no trace of Lacey. Not a dropped shoe. Not a footprint in mud. Not her canvas satchel. Not a single sign she had ever walked the path toward the library that morning. The only thing the town knew for sure was that Lacey had vanished somewhere between her mother's driveway and the sawmill curve, and the silence that followed would haunt Maple Hollow for years. But what the community didn't know, not then, not in 1989, was that someone else had been awake that morning. Someone who saw more than they ever told the police. Someone who would eventually become the key to unlocking the truth. And decades later, when the case went cold and hope seemed lost, that same person would resurface, carrying a story that would fracture the town to its core. A story no one was ready to believe. And it all began with what they saw in the fog. The first 12 hours of any disappearance are the most critical, though no one in Maple Hollow needed a detective to tell them that. By the time the clock crept past midnight on October 14th, 1989, search parties were already combing the woods with flashlights, calling Lacey's name into the cold Appalachian darkness. The fog had faded by late afternoon, replaced by a sharp, biting wind that carried the smell of wet leaves and distant chimney smoke. It was the kind of wind that made voices echo strangely between the hills, the kind that made every crack of a branch sound like footsteps. Ruth Whitlow stayed on her front porch, wrapped in her husband's old flannel coat, staring down Ridgeway Road as if at any moment Lacey would appear, braids swinging, boots muddy, apologizing for the scare. She wouldn't do this, Ruth whispered to Sheriff Hal Compton when he arrived. She wouldn't disappear. She knows how I worry. Sheriff Compton was a wide-shouldered man with a slow drawl and a reputation for calmness. But even he couldn't hide the tightness around his eyes. He'd known Lacey since she was a kid collecting arrowheads behind the church. He'd watched her grow into a gentle, thoughtful young woman who waved at everyone and remembered birthdays that even families forgot. People like Lacey didn't vanish. And yet, she had. Sheriff Compton started where everyone expected. The path from the Whitlow home to Ridgeway Road. Deputies walked the ditches, scanned the brush lines, and shined lights into culverts. They found nothing. Not a torn piece of clothing. Not a dropped item. Not a sign of struggle. It was as if the earth had simply swallowed her. Around 2 a.m., the fire department set up a temporary command post in the church parking lot. Volunteers poured in. Farmers, miners, high school seniors, moms carrying thermoses of coffee. Even Pastor Harlan, who rarely stayed awake past 10, appeared with a lantern in hand. But through all of it, no one realized the detail everyone missed. Lacey's canvas satchel was nowhere. Something she never went anywhere without. By dawn the next morning, fatigue hung over Maple Hollow like a heavy blanket. People were moving slower. Voices were hoarser. Eyes were red. Still, no one stopped searching. At 7:30 a.m., a deputy knocked on Ruth's door with a question that made her knees weaken. "Ma'am, was Lacey seeing anyone?" Anyone knew. Ruth blinked. "No, she barely dates. And when she does, I meet them." She wasn't talking to anybody. The deputy nodded, but his tone said he didn't believe that. Rumors started swirling before noon. She was planning to run away, someone suggested in Dottie's diner. "No," said another. "I heard she was pregnant." Someone else whispered. They found tire tracks near the creek. Fresh ones. Most of it was wrong. All of it was harmful. For hours later, Sheriff Compton stood in the middle of Ridgeway Road staring down at a set of faint impressions leading off into the tree line. Tire tracks. Wide. Heavy, but too faded to cast or trace. Could be a work truck, Deputy Lewis said. Could be anything, the sheriff answered. Could be nothing. But deep down, Hal Compton felt something twisting in his gut. Those tracks weren't nothing. They meant someone had been there. Someone big enough and bold enough to drive off-road in the early morning fog. Still without evidence, without witnesses, without DNA, the department was guessing. By the evening of the second day, the community's fear had hardened into dread. At the Whitlow home, the kitchen table became the epicenter of the search. Maps, notepads, photographs, and Polaroids were scattered across the wood surface. Chase Whitlow stood over them, hands planted on either side, jaw clenched so tight the muscle twitched. "She's out there," he kept saying. "She's out there, and someone knows something." Ruth sat quietly in her chair, gripping Lacey's favorite sweater, a pale green one that still smelled faintly of vanilla soap. "She wouldn't leave me," she whispered. "Someone took her." By the third day, exhaustion had set in. The sheriff called in search dogs from Charleston. They sniffed along the trail, but lost a scent near the old sawmill. Just like every lead so far, local news stations arrived, cameras rolling, capturing the desperation as volunteers continued to sweep the woods. Reporters lingered near the command post, asking questions that no one had answers to. What was she wearing? Did she have enemies? Did she ever talk about leaving town? Was she involved with someone dangerous? Each question was a needle to Ruth's heart. "I want my daughter home," she said on camera, her voice trembling. "Please, if someone has her, bring her back." Those words aired on the 6 p.m. news. And somewhere in Maple Hollow, someone watched. But the most unsettling moment came later that night, when a volunteer named Clint Rogers approached the sheriff, holding a small object he claimed to have found near a thicket off Ridgeway Road. At first glance, it didn't look like much. A metal zipper pull, silver, slightly bent. It was caught on a branch, Clint said. Could belong to anybody. But it didn't belong to anybody. It belonged to the canvas satchel Lacey carried every day. Sheriff Compton held it between his fingers, feeling its cold weight, knowing exactly what it implied. Lacey had reached this spot. Something had happened here. Maybe a struggle. Maybe a chase. Maybe something worse. That night, the search shifted focus. Flashlights illuminated the thicket. Dogs barked. Deputies marked possible drag patterns in the dirt. But no body was found. No satchel. No clothing. Nothing but the zipper pull. Then, on the fourth day, a whisper made its way around town. A rumor that grew legs and sprinted. Someone saw something that morning. Someone who hadn't spoken up. Someone who knew they should have. Someone who, for reasons unknown, had waited. That rumor reached the sheriff before sunrise. And by the time the church bell rang at 8 a.m., the person stepped forward. But what they said changed everything the investigation thought it knew. Because according to them, Lacey hadn't been alone on that fog-covered road. She had been talking to someone. Someone the town trusted. Someone they never suspected. And if the witness was telling the truth, the case was about to take a dark, complicated turn. The witness's name was Ellen Marsh, a soft-spoken woman in her late 60s who lived in a small white house on the edge of Ridgeway Road. In Maple Hollow, Ellen was known for two things: baking blackberry pies in the summer and minding her own business the rest of the year. She didn't pry. She didn't gossip. She didn't add to the noise of the town, which is why, when she walked into the sheriff's office clutching her cardigan tightly around her chest, everyone stopped what they were doing. "I need to talk to Sheriff Compton," she whispered, voice trembling. The sheriff led her into a back room, closed the door, and spoke gently. "Mrs. Marsh, take your time." Ellen's eyes brimmed with tears. "I should have said something sooner. I should have. I just didn't know if it meant anything." "What did you see?" the sheriff asked. Ellen swallowed hard. "I saw Lacey, and she wasn't alone." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Ellen continued. "It was just past 7 on Saturday morning. I was sitting by the window like I always do when my arthritis keeps me awake. I saw her walking down the road. She stopped near the sawmill path, and she was talking to someone in a truck. Sheriff Compton leaned forward. "Do you recognize the truck?" She nodded slowly. It was an old Ford. Two-tone, rust along the bottom. "I've seen it before." "Whose truck?" the sheriff pressed. Ellen hesitated. Her voice cracked when she finally whispered, "I believe it belonged to Carl Mason." The room went still. Carl Mason wasn't just anyone. He was a long-time Maple Hollow resident, a mechanic, a volunteer at the Fall Festival, and someone who'd grown up with half the people in town. People trusted him. People liked him. He fixed their cars and told them jokes while they waited. He helped neighbors chop wood, pulled kids' bikes out of ditches, and gave jump starts without asking for a dime. And he knew Lacey. Everyone knew that. They'd never been close, but Lacey had taken her old Chevy to his garage a handful of times over the years. According to him, she was polite, quiet, and grateful. But none of that mattered now, because if Ellen was telling the truth, Carl Mason was the last person seen talking to Lacey before she vanished. The sheriff thanked Ellen, reassured her she'd done the right thing, and stepped out of the room with a tension in the air so thick it felt suffocating. Deputy Lewis approached him quietly. "You think she might be mistaken?" "I don't know," Compton said, "but we can't ignore it." By noon, Carl Mason was called in for questioning. He arrived calm and cooperative, wiping grease from his hand with a rag, wearing a faded mechanic's jacket. He didn't ask if this was about Lacey. He already knew. "She's missing," he said with a somber shake of his head. "Damn shame. Sweet girl." The sheriff cut to the point. "Carl, where were you Saturday morning between 6 and 8? Carl furrowed his brow. "Working. I had a rush job on a generator. Joe Anders needed it fixed for his hunting cabin." "Anyone see you?" Lewis asked. "Just my dog," Carl replied. "But Joe can confirm the generator was done when he picked it up that afternoon." "Witness saw your truck near the sawmill," the sheriff said. Carl blinked. A long pause followed. "That's not possible," he finally said. "I wasn't anywhere near that road." But the sheriff had known Carl Mason his whole life, and something about the way Carl's jaw tensed didn't sit right. Still, without physical evidence, Carl walked out of the station a free man, and Maple Hollow reacted exactly as expected. The community split in two. Some said, "Carl would never hurt a soul." Others said, "He's been trouble since high school. You just never noticed." Some swore they saw Carl's truck the morning Lacey vanished. Others insisted he was being made a scapegoat. At Dottie's diner, voices rose and felt like waves crashing in a storm. "You see Carl's face when news came on?" one man whispered. He looked nervous. "That man fixed my radiator last month." A woman shot back. He didn't look like a killer. Even Pastor Harlan felt helpless addressing the growing fear. His Sunday sermon opened with trembling hands. "We are a community built on trust," he said, "but we are also a community that must demand truth." Ruth and Chase, meanwhile, were living in a torment no one could ease. Ruth stopped sleeping. She sat on the couch at night, clutching the landline, waiting for it to ring, waiting for someone to say they found her daughter alive. Chase grew quiet and sharp, snapping at neighbors, clenching his fists, demanding action from police who were doing everything they could with almost nothing to work with. At one point, Chase drove to Carl Mason's garage himself. His mother caught wind of it and followed him, finding him standing in the driveway shouting. "Where is she?" he yelled, voice cracking. Carl stepped out onto the gravel, palms up. "Chase, I didn't hurt your sister. I swear it." Chase lunged forward, and Ruth barely pulled him back. Carl didn't fight, didn't raise a hand, just stared at the ground with a pain in his eyes that made him look older than his 33 years. "I want her found," Carl said quietly. "Same as you." But Chase didn't believe him, couldn't believe him. That confrontation spread like wildfire. By evening, Carl had become the most whispered name in Maple Hollow, and still no new evidence surfaced. 3 more days passed, then 5, then a week. Flyers with Lacey's face were plastered on telephone poles, church doors, and convenience store windows. But after almost 10 days, the frantic energy of the search shifted to something heavier: resignation. People started returning to work. Volunteers dwindled. Hope thinned, but the Whitlows refused to give up. Ruth placed a candle in her front window every night. "For Lacey," she told anyone who asked, "so she knows we're waiting." Chase drove to Charleston, demanding help from state authorities. They gave him sympathy, a contact number, and little else. Then came the vigil. Hundreds gathered outside the church holding candles, their breath visible in the cold night air. Songs were sung slowly, voices wavering. Ruth stood between Chase and Pastor Harlan, clutching a photograph of Lacey from her high school graduation, the one where her smile was just slightly off-center, shy and hopeful. The vigil was meant to comfort the family, but instead, it deepened the sense of dread, because everyone who stood there holding candles knew what they couldn't say out loud. After 10 days, the odds of finding Lacey alive were almost gone. Yet, something strange happened during the vigil. Out of the corner of her eye, Ruth noticed a figure standing alone at the far edge of the churchyard. A man, still, watching her. She couldn't make out his face in the dim light, and when she turned fully toward him, he stepped back into the shadows and walked away. "Did you see that?" Ruth whispered to Chase. "See what?" But Ruth wasn't imagining it. Someone had been there. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who'd been watching the Whitlows from a distance. And that man, whoever he was, would soon play an unexpected role in the case. Because only a few days later, that same figure would make a phone call to the sheriff's office. A call that would shift the entire investigation and lead police down a dark, twisted path of secrets no one in Maple Hollow ever believed existed. The anonymous call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. Sheriff Hal Compton had been asleep in his recliner at the station, boots on, radio beside him, a blanket someone's wife had dropped off during the first week of the search. When the phone rang, he jolted awake, heart hammering. Only two kinds of calls came this late, drunken nonsense or something that mattered. He answered on the second ring. "Sheriff's office," he said, voice rough. A pause, soft breathing. Then a man spoke, his voice low and strained. "You're looking in the wrong place." Compton straightened. "Who is this?" "You're wasting time on that mechanic." The man whispered. He didn't take her. Sheriff Compton's pulse jumped. "Who are you?" But the caller ignored the question. "Check the old copper mine. The one up past Briar Ridge." A shaky breath. "You'll find something there." The line clicked dead. The sheriff stared at the receiver for a full 3 seconds before snapping into motion. He scribbled notes, replaying the voice in his head. It wasn't familiar, but there was something about the tone. Fear, guilt, urgency. Someone who knew more than they were supposed to. By 3 a.m., Compton and Deputy Lewis were in a patrol truck with high beams slicing to the pre-dawn darkness as they headed toward Briar Ridge. The old mine had been closed since 1974 after a collapse killed 2 men. Locals avoided the place. Some called it haunted. Kids dared each other to go inside for Halloween. It wasn't a place anyone would accidentally wander into. Fog settled low along the mountain curves as they drove. A whippoorwill echoed in the trees. Cold wind rattled dried branches. It was the kind of night where sound traveled strangely. When they pulled up to the rusted gate, blocking the path to the mine, Compton felt a prickling at the back of his neck. Something was wrong. Whether it was intuition or experience, he wasn't sure, but the air felt heavier. Lewis unlatched the chain. How'd the caller know about this place? "No idea," Compton muttered, "but we're about to find out." They walked the last stretch on foot, flashlights sweeping through dense pines and overgrown brush. The mine entrance appeared like a black mouth in the rock, supported by rotted timber beams. Lewis whispered, "Smells like damp and metal. Stay sharp." Inside, the air was cold and stale. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling. Their footsteps echoed off stone walls as they moved deeper. 50 feet in, Compton's flashlight flickered over something on the ground. Fabric, small, torn, caught on a nail protruding from a beam. He crouched, heart thudding. It was a strip of pale green cloth, the same shade as Lacey Whitlow's favorite sweater. "Bag it," he said, voice tight. They searched for over an hour, but found nothing else. Not footprints, not belongings, not drag marks. Just that single piece of fabric. By sunrise, news of the discovery spread, and Maple Hollow erupted with new theories. Some believed she had run toward the mine for help. Some insisted she had been taken there. Some whispered about satanic rituals and cults that had been rumored in the region in the 80s. Nonsense. But fear makes fertile soil for paranoia. But the most fierce whisper was about Carl Mason. People twisted the new evidence however they saw fit. He knows these mountains better than anyone. He used to hunt up there. He worked odd jobs near the ridge. Even though the sheriff had publicly stated that Carl wasn't a suspect at this time, the town had already decided he was guilty. And still, it didn't sit right with Compton. Carl doesn't strike me as the type to make anonymous calls, he muttered to Lewis. And he sure as hell wouldn't lead us to evidence if he was guilty. So someone's framing him? Or someone's hiding? The next false lead arrived in the form of a drifter. 3 days after the mine search, a trucker passing through Maple Hollow claimed he saw a girl matching Lacey's description hitchhiking along Route 19. The deputy on duty, a young rookie named Miles, filed a report with shaky excitement. "We should alert the state police," he said. "What if she's alive out there?" But Sheriff Compton shook his head. "Route 19 is 40 miles from here. And hitchhiking? That girl wouldn't get into a stranger's car even if her life depended on it." Still, they checked. Deputies canvassed gas stations, diners, and motels along the highway. Nothing. No sightings. No receipts. No one remembered seeing her. False lead number 2. Then came the worst one. On a rainy Monday, a teenage boy stumbled into the station drenched, shaking, claiming he'd found a body near the riverbank. The whole department mobilized instantly. Sirens cut through the storm as deputies raced to the site. They combed the riverbank in roaring rain, hearts pounding. 20 minutes later, they found the body. A discarded mannequin, missing its arms and covered in mud. The teen had meant well. Panic made him mistake plastic for flesh. But the emotional whiplash was brutal. Some deputies cried in their cars afterward, the tension of the last 2 weeks finally cracking through. False lead number 3. By now, the investigation felt like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Every step forward dissolved into 2 steps back. The town's patience frayed. Ruth Whitlow stopped answering reporters. Chase kept showing up at the station demanding updates. Pastor Harlan hosted nightly prayer circles. Maple Hollow was unraveling slowly, painfully. But amidst the chaos, something caught Sheriff Compton's attention rear its head again. The mysterious figure Ruth had seen at the vigil. She thought she saw a man watching her, Compton said to Lewis one morning. And then we get an anonymous phone call from a man. What if it's the same person? You think he abducted her? I think he knows something. Compton rubbed his temples. Maybe he saw something he shouldn't have. Or maybe he's scared. Think he'll call again? Compton stared at the phone on his desk. If he meant what he said, yeah, he'll call again. But the call didn't come. Instead, the next major turn came from a place no one expected. On October 27th, 13 days after Lacey vanished, a group of teens exploring the woods behind Maple Hollow High found something wedged between 2 rocks near the creek. A canvas satchel. Damp, dirty, recognizable in an instant. Lacey's satchel. The teens brought it straight to the sheriff's office, breathless and pale. Inside were 3 items. A small spiral notebook filled with Lacey's neat handwriting, her reading glasses in a cracked case, and a library receipt dated the morning she disappeared. The receipt was time-stamped 6:52 a.m. She made it to the library, Compton whispered, or she was headed there. But there was something else. Something worse. The satchel was sliced open along one side. A clean cut, as if someone had deliberately emptied it, then discarded it. Ruth cried when she saw it, clutching the bag to her chest. Chase slammed his fist into the sheriff's desk, so hard he left a bruise on his knuckles. "What does this mean?" he demanded. Compton exhaled slowly. "It means she didn't run away. It means someone intercepted her. And you still haven't arrested anyone?" Chase snapped. "You've interrogated Carl, but you haven't done a damn thing about it." "Chase," Compton said calmly, "I told you, the evidence doesn't point to him." "Then who does it point to?" Chase roared. Silence followed. The truth was painful. The evidence didn't clearly point to anyone. Nothing fit neatly. Nothing made sense. That night, after the station cleared out, Compton sat alone reviewing everything. Photos, statements, maps, timelines. His head pounded. His stomach churned. Something was missing. Something important. Something that would pull all the loose threads together. At 11:42 p.m., the phone rang again. This time, Compton answered before the second ring. "Talk to me," he said sharply. The voice on the line was the same, strained, shaky, terrified. "You didn't find her in the mine," the man whispered. Compton swallowed hard. "Is she alive?" A pause, breath trembling. "You're getting close," the caller said. "And someone in your town doesn't like that." "Who?" Compton gripped the phone. "Tell me who." But the man's voice dropped to a whisper that chilled the sheriff to the bone. "He's dangerous. He watches the family. He watches you. And if you don't stop digging," another breath, "he'll make someone else disappear." The line went dead. Compton sat frozen, phone pressed his ear, heart pounding. Someone in Maple Hollow was watching the Whitlows, watching the investigation, threatening more harm, and the sheriff finally realized the truth. This wasn't just a disappearance. This was a predator. Someone who had lived among them for years. Someone smart, careful, invisible. And whoever he was beginning to panic, because the police were getting closer than he wanted them to, and he was about to make his most desperate move yet. The call that changed everything came on a Monday morning, so ordinary it could have slipped past unnoticed. Fog draped the town again, not unlike the morning Megan disappeared. Detective Carla James sat at her desk, half-cold coffee beside her, preparing to close the file for the day when her phone buzzed. It was a new forensic analyst from Charleston, the one who had been re-examining stained evidence using upgraded software. His voice trembled, barely able to contain the weight of what he was about to deliver. "Detective James, we got a hit." Carla froze. Her pen slipped from her fingers and clattered across the desk. "On which item?" "The buckle from Megan's backpack," he replied. "We ran the full genomic profile. The previous test missed it. But now, it's a match to someone currently in the National Offender DNA database." Carla's heartbeat kicked hard against her ribs. Who? A name she had never expected. A name that had once seemed so far outside the realm of suspicion, it hadn't even been whispered by rumor. Cole Hartman. The same Cole Hartman who, in 1989, had been Megan's friendly neighbor. The same man who had helped search through the woods. The same man who had brought casserole to the family in the days after she vanished. The same man who had moved away in the early 2000s claiming he wanted a quieter life. Carla leaned forward, gripping the edge of her desk. "Are you absolutely certain?" Certainty at 99.99%. The system flagged him immediately. His DNA was entered 2 years ago after a misdemeanor arrest in Ohio. Her mind whirled. Cole had been interviewed briefly back then. He had an alibi provided by his mother, who had since passed away. No one had thought to challenge it. People trusted him. He was the type who waved at neighbors while tending his garden. The type who volunteered at fall festivals. The type who appeared harmless and helpful in the ways killers often hide behind. Carla didn't even hang up properly before she stood and marched straight to her captain's office. Within hours, a multi-state task force had assembled. Cole was living in a small rental home outside of Columbus, Ohio. He worked at a hardware store. No spouse. No children. No criminal record beyond that one minor offense. The very offense that had opened the door to justice. A warrant was drafted, signed, and approved faster than Carla believed possible after so many stagnant years. The drive to Ohio felt unreal, as if she were floating between past and present. Deputy Marshal Trent Hale rode in the passenger seat, scanning a thin file on Hartman's life after he left West Virginia. "Doesn't look like he drew attention anywhere he went." Hale said, "No complaints from neighbors. No violent incidents. Real low profile." Carla nodded. He hid in plain sight. They always do. When they arrived near Cole's neighborhood, unmarked vehicles quietly fanned out. Officers surrounded the block. The early evening sky glowed dull orange as the sun sank behind rows of modest duplexes. Carla approached the front door with Hale and two others. She knocked. There was a moment of stillness. A long, dreadful pause. Then the door opened. Cole Hartman stood barefoot, wearing a gray t-shirt and worn jeans. Thin, pale, his eyes darted from one badge to another. But he didn't ask who they were. He didn't ask why they were there. His expression collapsed, as though his spirit recognized the truth before his mind caught up. Cole Hartman. Hale said, stepping forward, "You're under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Megan Pierce." Cole inhaled sharply, but no denial came. No protests. No anger. Just a subtle, broken whisper. "I knew this day would come." The handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Officers guided him to the car as neighbors emerged from porches, gasping, whispering, recording on their phones. One woman pressed a hand to her mouth. Another stepped back as if she'd seen a ghost. The drive back to West Virginia felt heavier than the drive out. Carla sat across from Cole in the interview room hours later. He looked smaller somehow, like the exterior shell he'd worn his whole life had finally cracked. "Why her?" Carla asked. Cole stared at his hands. "I don't know how to explain something I've hated myself for every day since." "Try." He swallowed hard. "She was kind. Too kind. She used to say good morning to me, laughed at my stupid jokes, asked about my dog." Carla's face stayed still. "So you hurt her because she was kind?" Cole's voice crumbled. "I didn't mean for it to go so far. I just wanted to talk to her that morning. She got scared. Started yelling. I panicked. Carla felt anger burn behind her ribs, but she didn't show it. And then Cole squeezed his eyes shut. "I'm not ready to say the rest." "You don't get to choose anymore," she said quietly. Her family waited 35 years. Cole trembled. "I know." Outside the interrogation room, Megan's brother, now in his 50s, stood by the viewing window. His shoulders were shaking. "Just tell me," he whispered to Carla when she stepped out. "Will he finally say what he did to her?" Carla exhaled slowly, her pulse drumming. "He will," she answered, "because now he has nowhere left to hide." But what Cole revealed next would shake not only the family, but the entire Appalachian community, in a way no one was prepared for. The truth, still waiting behind that closed door, was darker than any of them imagined. What Cole finally confessed unfolded not in one dramatic outburst, but in slow, trembling pieces that seemed to drag the air out of the room. Carla sat across from him, watching the weight of 35 years settle onto his shoulders like a collapsing roof. He admitted that he had approached Megan that morning under the guise of returning a borrowed book. She was polite as always, but cautious. She was running late, backpack on her shoulder, ready to walk to school. When he insisted on talking privately, Megan stepped back. She sensed something was off. Her refusal triggered something in him. Something he claimed he didn't understand even now. He grabbed her arm. She screamed, and in a panic, he forced her toward the tree line near her house. Cole didn't glamorize anything. He didn't soften the cruelty of that moment. He said he never intended for Megan to die. But fear, adrenaline, and a catastrophic loss of control led to a struggle that ended her life. He hid her body in the woods, thinking he would return after dark to move her, but heavy rain that evening washed away footprints and softened the ground. He buried her shallowly, convinced that no one would find her. The room felt colder as he spoke. Every word gnawed at Carla. Every sentence chipped away at the family's hope that maybe, just maybe, Megan hadn't suffered. When Cole finished speaking, he looked up, eyes swollen, voice barely audible. "I am sorry," he whispered, "but apologies offered 3 decades too late rarely soften grief. They don't resurrect the dead. They don't patch the holes gouged into families." Megan's mother, now in her 70s, listened to confession from behind the glass. Her hands never left her mouth. She shook silently, absorbing the truth she had feared yet needed. When the interview ended, she asked to see Carla privately. "Did she fight?" she asked in a small voice. "Yes," Carla replied. "She did. She fought hard." Megan's mother closed her eyes, letting tears slip down her face. "Good," she whispered. That was my girl. News of the arrest spread through West Virginia like a brush fire. People who had grown up with Megan. People who remembered the missing posters stapled to telephone poles. People who had suspected strangers, drifters, anyone but the man who had walked among them without a hint of darkness. For days, the town buzzed with disbelief. Old neighbors sat on porch swings revisiting memories they thought they had left behind. Teachers cried in school hallways. Former classmates sent messages to one another, stunned that the man they once trusted with neighborhood children had been a monster all along. Cole Hartman was charged with kidnapping, murder, and tampering with evidence. His trial was swift. His sentence, life without parole, was announced to a packed courtroom where every seat seemed to hold someone who had been touched by Megan's kindness all those years ago. But the trial didn't bring closure. Not fully. That's not how grief works. What it did bring was truth. And truth, even painful, has a strange way of letting people breathe again after decades of holding their breath. Megan's belongings, preserved for years, were finally returned to her family. Her mother kept a faded denim jacket Megan loved, hanging it in her bedroom doorway as if her daughter might someday walk by and brush her fingers along the sleeve. Her brother, now with gray threading his hair, visited her grave site more often, telling her about his own kids, about life, about the things she never got to see. Detective Carla James found herself changed too. Cold cases weren't just files to her anymore. They were promises, vows made silently to families who waited in the unbearable space between hope and despair. Megan's case reminded her that justice can move slowly, painfully slowly, but it can still arrive. The Appalachian town would never forget Megan Pierce. They would never forget her laughter echoing during summer festivals, her bright sneakers kicking loose gravel on the road to school, or the gentle way she treated everyone around her. And they would never forget the long fight to uncover what happened on that fog-draped morning in 1989. In the end, the truth wasn't a light that erased the darkness, but it was a light that pierced it just enough for a community and a family to step forward again. And as they gathered the annual memorial walk that spring, Megan's mother stood at the front of the crowd, holding a single white lantern. When she released it into the sky, watching it float upward toward the fading dusk, she whispered softly, "You can rest now, baby. We finally brought you home." The lantern disappeared into the vast West Virginia night. And for the first time in 35 years, the town felt quiet.